How's it going, everybody? It's SaltyTreecko, and today we're going to be taking a break from clowning on GameRant to talk about something more positive, and we're going to be talking about Pokemon stat buffs. Now, normally when you think of Pokemon being buffed, especially in this day and age, you think more of like gaining abilities, or gaining move pool additions, or buffs to moves, or just general battle mechanic changes. But there's actually a less known form of buffs in the form of stat changes, and they're less known for a reason because typically they're not very impactful. Usually, Game Rant's a little game. Geez, talking about Game Rant too much. Game Freak, sorry, is a little hesitant to just purely pump stats into Pokemon for obvious reasons. It could be pretty dangerous, and you don't want to overtune your Pokemon. However, typically these stat buffs are really not very impactful. They'll usually just be like a 10 point boost to like your special defense or something relatively minor like that. And believe it or not, there's actually been 55 total changes to Pokemon stats over the course of Generation 6, 7, and 8. The most commonly known, most likely because it's the most recent, was actually a nerf, with Aegislash having its base defense and special defense reduced from, I believe, 150 to 140. And believe it or not, out of the 55 total stat changes, that is the only nerf. And that's a positive thing, because it means that a lot of Pokemon that have fallen to the wayside have been getting extra attention from Game Freak, even if it's relatively minor. But today we're going to be looking at some of the cooler ones, some of the more impactful ones that may have slipped under the radar. First Pokemon I want to talk about is Scolipede, and I should have mentioned this in the intro, but for the record, this is going to be a singles-focused video. There's just always, whenever I talk about things like these, there's always one VGC head in the comment who's like, where's Incineroar? So today we're going to be talking about singles. Keep that in mind when I'm discussing viability. So Scolipede actually got a lot of love from Game Freak in between Generation 5 and 6, the most obvious of which is having access to a new hidden ability in the form of Speed Boost, which is obviously one of the best abilities of all time for an offensive Pokemon, liquidated to Blaziken. And this isn't actually the only love that Scolipede got. It actually got an additional 10 points to its attack stat, which doesn't seem like much, but going from base 90 to base 100 is actually a pretty significant jump. And when you pair that with Speed Boost, it actually matters a lot, because 90 base attack isn't terrifically strong by any means. Generation 4 and Generation 5 are two generations where Game Freak loved to have Pokemon's Pokedex descriptions be like, it's so strong, it can destroy mountains and crush cars, it's so big and powerful, and then give it like base 80 attack. So Generation 6 kind of did a lot to remedy that by increasing Scolipede and other Pokemon's attack stats. Now Scolipede is 100 base, or 100 attack, and that actually matters quite a bit when you think about how much damage this Pokemon is going to be doing, because it already has a very high base power attack in the form of Mega Horn, but its other move isn't terrific. It has Poison Jab as its other stab option, which is pretty weak, and when you pair that with a 90 base attack stat, it's not really doing too much. And the additional attack also allows Earthquake to be doing a lot more, and the combination of these two buffs actually sent Scolipede all the way from NUBL to UUBL between 5 and 6, which I think is actually really impressive. So that's just one example of where it's just a little bit, but without that extra boost to its base attack stat, it wouldn't really be a very good sweeper. Now we're going to be talking about a Generation 7 buff in the form of Swellow. Now Swellow already had a nice set in the form of Guts, especially because it had Stab Facade and 125 speed, which was really good. And the reason Swellow's on this list is because it actually received a really big buff to its special attack. Pre-Generation 7, Swellow had a base 50 special attack, which is really pathetic, but then it got 25 points to its special attack to boost all the way up to 75, and 75 still isn't hitting like a truck, but Swellow is one of the few Pokemon, especially in Generation 7, with access to Boom Burst, which is one of the most powerful moves in the game. And once again, similarly to Facade, it gets its stab. I believe it is 140 base power in Generation 7. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, Swellow went from a Pokemon that was pretty one-dimensional. It did have access to Guts, but when it came out, you basically knew what he was doing. If it had its item removed, it was basically worthless. Had terrible longevity because not only is it weak to rocks, which it still is with the special set, but because you have the Flame Orb chipping you down, and you also have Recoil from Brave Bird, which is its primary stab option. But with Boom Burst, Swellow can actually run a spec set. and just come in, click Boom Burst, which is deceptively strong, even off of 75 base special attack, just because it's such a high base power move, and then you factor Stab on top of it. It's just a really great move. And I feel like people forget that Swellow used to be so ridiculously weak on the special side before this. So this was actually a very significant buff for Swellow, because now not only does it have another functional set that it can run, which doesn't affect its longevity, but the fact that it could either be Specs or Guts gives it an predictability factor, a boost to its predictability, so you don't just know what's going to happen every time you switch it in. And these two sets have very different counters, because if you switch in your defensive Pokemon and then you get smashed by a freaking Specs Boom Burst, you're going to be getting sent to the stratosphere. And the other way around, if you send in your Special Wall, like imagine sending in, I know this is still like RU or whatever tier Swellow is in at the time. I don't know why I'm saying that. I can check NU in Generation 7. But like, let's say that hypothetically you have a Blissey and you swap in a Blissey expecting a Boom Burst, and they get hit with a fucking Guts Facade. Well, it wouldn't have Guts activated, but you get the point. You're still getting hit with a strong ass physical move, and you didn't expect it. And it means that Swellow was a very good Pokemon at breaking holes into the opponent's team, which is very great team support if you're running an offensive build. Next two Pokemon actually we're going to be talking about are Chimecho and Corsola, and these are two Pokemon that obviously were never particularly viable and still were not very viable after the buff, but the reason I think they're interesting is both of them are the only Pokemon to receive stat buffs to 3 different stats in the same generation. Both of them gained 10 points to attack, to special defense, and to defense, so just got a all-around boost to their defensive profile. And once again, these Pokemon aren't particularly great or even good or even mediocre. They're still not very good. Game Freak still is at least trying, right? Like they recognize that these Pokemon don't really do shit, and they're like, okay, let's at least put some care into them. So it's nice to see two Pokemon that just were pretty much terrible get these buffs, even if they weren't too impactful. I think Corsola is the only one that really got any benefits out of this. Like, even in the lower tiers, I don't remember Chimecho ever performing anything amazing. Like, the only thing it really did is like a Wish Passer set. Jesus Christ, say that as a tongue twister 10 times fast. Corsola did do decently well, though. Obviously, in Generation 8 is when Corsola came out? Yeah, when the Galarian form of Corsola came out. I'm not too sure if it maintained the same base stat total, but obviously Galarian Corsola had a very nice defensive profile with Eviolite, and it had things like strength stat for longevity. But even Corsola, like in the lower tiers, you could run it as a defensive wall. You'd go like Rocks, Toxic, and it had Regenerator. Once again, I'm not claiming it's a great Pokemon or anything, or even that it was used in the lower tiers, but I think those are just more interesting sides of stat buffs. Another Pokemon that's on here, more because the stat boost itself is more interesting rather than the Pokemon, is Masquerain, and that's because Masquerain is the only Pokemon in Pokemon history, at least to my knowledge. I might have missed something, please point it out in the comments if I missed something, to have a total of 40 points added to its base stats, with 20 added to its speed and 20 added to its special attack between Generation 6 and 7. So just another case where it's like, it didn't really do much in the end for the Pokemon. They did give it Quiver Dance, which I guess this was supposed to help it wield Quiver Dance more efficiently, but it's still not very strong, and it's still pathetically slow, and it still has a terrible typing. So unfortunately, Masquerain didn't benefit too much out of this, but at least it's cool in and of itself. Now here's a more impactful one, since the 3 that I talked about previously are more on the simple side. Pelipper between Generation 6 and 7. Obviously, the biggest boost that everyone knows about is Drizzle, one of the best abilities in the game for a support Pokemon. But it also got an additional 10 points to its special attack. So this is a really cool buff for Pelipper because it gained access to setting up its own rain, which is not only good for its teammates, but it's also good for itself, because previously it didn't really do much offensively. It was just kind of a defensive defogger. It had a Roost, you could U-turn, I guess. It was just like a pivot support Pokemon, but it just gained such a new world, a new life coming into Generation 7, and even up to Generation 9, where previously it just couldn't do too much damage, but now, not only with the new ability, it also is able to hit stronger on its attacks, which are already boosted by its own rain. So things like Hydro Pump before it got Weather Ball, not only get the rain boost, but it also is just hitting stronger on its own. And then moves like Hurricane, which are now 100% accurate in the rain, also get a boost to its damage. So this is a really great boost for rain as a playstyle in general. Whether or not you like that is up to you. I like using rain, but I hate facing it. So if you want to see this as a good buff, or if you're like, fuck that Pelipper guy, I hate that little rat. Why did Game Freak boost this stupid Sky Rat? That's up to you. But in terms of whether or not it was a good buff, it definitely helped Pelipper a lot. I'm going to end this off with another sort of shock value Pokemon in terms of base stats, because Cryogonal is a Pokemon where it's obviously known as a more defensively minded Pokemon. It has very good special defense, 135, 50 base defense, and 80 base HP. So it's obviously a Pokemon that's meant to be a special ball, and it's really frail on the physical side, so you have to be careful about whether or not you bring it in. And then it has a pretty solid support move pool, notably with Rapid Spin. Freeze Dry is a nice move, and then it has Recover as well. So it's got some good options to work with for a support Pokemon. But one thing that I honestly was kind of surprised about when I saw this buff is that Cryogonal's base defense used to be 30. It also got a 10-point buff to HP, so it used to be 70 and then it went to 80. But just think about the fact that Game Freak, when they created this Pokemon in Generation 5, was like, you know what? I want to have a fully evolved Pokemon with base fucking 30 defense. That seems like a perfectly normal and rational thing to do to this Pokemon. And obviously it didn't perform very well. This is not a Pokemon that had a major impact on basically any metagame. It's in PU tier right now, and I'm not too sure how it's doing down there. I think it's a decent Pokemon if I remember False Swipe Gaming correctly. But other than that, man, 30 base defense is just so god-awful. Good lord. It did get better in subsequent generations. I think it was NU, if I remember, in Generation 7. Let me tab this over. Let's see. How you doing, Cryogonal? Nope, still in PU. Was it even in Gen 8? Nope, ZU. Okay, I'm just lying, but at least it got that buff. It's not a completely terrible defensive Pokemon anymore, so you have to give the devs that. That was just a collection of Pokemon with stat buffs that I thought were pretty neat. Wasn't really a top 10 list or anything. If there are any buffs that you thought were cooler that you wanted me to mention maybe in a different video, feel free to drop in the comments. But other than that, thanks for watching. Boom like, boom subscribe, boom membership, I don't know. Have a good day.